This video will detail how to utilize the 5280 distal injection tool. Injecting a custom distal pad in the bottom of the socket significantly improves comfort for the patient as well as ensures total contact during the fitting process. If a thicker distal pad is desired, the negative impression can be cut and splinted back together with a spacer block. This will increase the chamber depth as well as the distal pad thickness. Alternatively, additional space can be added when the dummy is bonded to the model. Simply build up extra space between the dummy and the model and any additional buildups to increase distal pad thickness. Begin by disassembling the injection tool. Remove the injection plate from the housing. Apply a rubber band around the tool housing. This will prevent silicone from leaking around the tool during the injection process. Use Vaseline to lubricate the rubber band. Identify the 4-hole Euro pattern in the bottom of the tool. Insert the tool into the distal aspect of the socket with the 4-hole pattern facing downward. Use a 4mm wrench to adjust the position of the tool such that the hole patterns line up. Ensure your socket has a center hole so you'll be able to inject silicone up through the center of the socket. There are 2 threaded holes and 2 through holes in the end of the distal injection tool. Locate the 2 threaded holes to install the injection plate. Orientate your injection plate such that the center hole in the plate mates with the center hole in the distal aspect of the socket. Face the injection port anterior. Use the included 30mm screws to tighten the injection plate onto the socket. The injection plate should sit flush on the bottom of the socket to mitigate problems with silicone leakage during the injection process. Ensure your injection hole is anterior to make the process easier. There are 2 through holes on the distal aspect of the tool. This allows air to escape distally. If this is not desired, take measures to plug the holes prior to injecting. The 9-hole pattern in the distal injection tool should face upward when you have completed the installation. Check fit your test socket on your patient's residual limb. Ensure that the socket fits comfortably and the patient's residual limb does not slide down into the socket farther than anticipated. If necessary, add socks to help float the residual limb to the proper position in the check socket. The gap in the bottom of the socket should be proportionate to the buildup that you used during the modification process. Evaluate the trim lines and the hydrostatic tension of the socket and ensure that your fit is correct. Add the necessary amount of sock ply to float the residual limb in the socket properly. The void in the distal aspect of the socket should parallel the buildup that you applied to the limb during the buildup process. If the residual limb is going into the socket too far, add additional socks to help float the limb to the proper elevation. Use saran wrap to help protect the liner, socks, and residual limb during the silicone injection process. Apply a vacuum casting nylon over the residual limb. Orientate the seam anterior-posterior. Ensure that the vacuum nylon is not too tight, as this can curl the edges of your silicone pad. The sock will become an integral part of the distal pad. Mark the anterior distal tibia section of the sock. This will be used as a reference mark for orientating the distal pad. Reapply the socket to the limb. Use a piece of P-light between the socket and the limb stand for added traction. The P-light will also help block the distal holes in the tool. Have your patient stand in the parallel bars. Ensure that the pelvis is level during the injection process. It's also important to note that the skeletal structure should be centered down through the bottom of the socket. The tool should sit flush on the limb stand if the socket fabrication was done correctly. Inject EcoFlex 5 into the distal aspect of the socket. EcoFlex 5 is a fast-setting silicone with a 45-second pot life and a 5-minute demold time. Slowly inject the silicone into the distal aspect of the socket. Ensure that the silicone comes up evenly across the bottom of the socket. This distal pad will be used in your definitive socket. assuming that your puck placement and the alignment of the socket is correct. The patient should apply 50-50 weight during the injection process. The injection gun can be removed once the silicone has hardened on the outside of the P-line pad. Allow the patient to sit and remove the socket from the patient's residual limb. Upon removal, inspect the distal pad. The pad should feather perfectly to the edges of the socket wall with no bubbles, gaps, or ledges that you can visibly see. Disassemble the distal injection tool by unscrewing the 30mm screws in the distal end of the tool. Pull the injection plate from the socket. Trim the remnant from the injection port. To remove the distal injection tool, install two 40mm screws into the threaded inserts in the tool. Place the socket on the bench or on the ground and apply your full body weight down through the socket. Mark the distal pad orientation on the outside of the socket. Remove the screws from the distal tool. Carefully pull on the nylon and remove the distal pad and injection tool from the distal aspect of the socket. Slowly pull the distal pad out of the injection tool. This will self-clean the tool. Inspect the distal pad. We are now ready to remove the nylon portion from the pad. Trim just proximal to the silicone feathered edge. Take care not to cut too deeply into the silicone, as this can leave a ledge and leave a transition line in the socket which can cause discomfort. Trim all the remnants and the flashing on the distal aspect of your pad. Light tension on each injection port remnant can help to produce a flush cut. To produce a center hole in the bottom of your distal pad, pull on the center remnant and cut under tension. Trim the proximal edges of the distal pad. Do not cut the pad too low. This can form a shelf on the edge of the distal pad. If you have injected a thicker distal pad, use a 1/2-inch punch and a hammer. Turn the distal pad upside down and punch out the center of the distal pad. The socket is now ready for the puck installation and patient fitting.